The bedroom door swung open like a scream, trapped in wood and hinges. I stood frozen in the threshold, watching the world tilt sideways. My husband sat on the edge of our bed, the one where I'd whispered my dreams and nursed him through flu, the one he'd promised belonged only to us. One arm circled the waist of the woman beside him. Her hands rested on the swell of her belly, and the sight of it lodged like ice in my throat. "Cassandra, please." His voice trembled with the practiced guilt he'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. "You have to help her. I can't do this alone." He couldn't do this alone, as if the problem was logistics, as if the devastation of my life was a scheduling conflict. The mistress looked at me with eyes red from crying, her lower lip trembling with an appeal for sympathy I could no longer afford to give. She was beautiful in the effortless way that made men stupid. Dark hair, luminous eyes, and youth that had convinced my husband he could erase the last decade and a half like dirty laundry. My chest tightened so severely I thought I might shatter into pieces right there on the hardwood floor. Every sacrifice I'd made for this man, the graduate degree I'd deferred, the promotion I'd turned down when he got the job transfer, the countless nights I'd listened to his problems while my own went unheard, all of it evaporated in a single moment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull her hair and watch him bleed. I wanted to burn it all down. Instead, I forced my hands to relax. "Of course," I heard myself say. My voice was steady, quiet, almost serene. "Tell me what you need." That night, after my husband had finally retreated to his study, and the mistress, Sophia, I'd learned her name was Sophia, had fallen into an exhausted sleep, I sat alone in our kitchen with my laptop and a glass of wine I couldn't taste. My name is Cassandra Monroe, and I have a gift for seeing what others miss. It started in childhood. While my siblings fought loudly for attention, I learned that the real power came from observation. I watched my father's tells before he got angry. I noted the patterns in my mother's moods. By adolescence, I could read a room like other people read books, noticing when someone was lying, what they wanted, how to give it to them while preserving myself. In marriage, this gift had been a liability. I'd seen Michael's cruelty long before I'd admitted it to myself. The way he laughed at my jokes only when others were listening. The way he'd contradict me in public and claim I was too sensitive when I mentioned it. The small surgical cuts he made to my confidence until I believed the lies he told about me being incompetent, unstable, impossible to please. 15 years. I'd endured 15 years of a man who'd convinced me that my perception was faulty and my feelings were disproportionate. But there was one thing Michael had never learned. Observation cuts both ways. I opened my files, physical records I'd kept for 3 years in a locked drawer he'd never bothered to check. Printed emails, receipts from an account he thought was hidden. The photographs I'd taken of his second phone, the one he kept in his office desk. I had documented his betrayals methodically, the way other women might have kept a journal of their heartbreak. The difference was I wasn't broken. I was preparing. I spent the next 4 hours building a timeline. Every infidelity, every lie, every hidden transfer to a separate account. Michael wasn't just unfaithful, he was a thief. Small amounts at first. But over the years, nearly $200,000 had vanished into his secret world. Sophia wasn't the first. She was the 7th. Maybe the 8th. There were gaps in the timeline I couldn't quite fill. I closed the laptop and finished the wine. Tomorrow, I would become the devoted wife he'd always wanted, the one who would do anything to protect his interests, the perfect mask over the storm. "Thank you for understanding," Sophia said 3 days later, her hand trembling as she held a mug of tea I'd made. We sat in what used to be my sanctuary, the sunroom I'd decorated with my own hands, filled with plants I'd nurtured and windows I'd chosen. Now it smelled like her perfume. "Michael said you'd be kind," I supplied gently, settling beside her with a sympathetic expression I'd practiced in the mirror. "He wasn't wrong. I'm a realist, Sophia. You're here now. The baby is coming. Fighting that reality won't change it. It was the perfect lie. It positioned me as the reasonable one, the bigger person, the woman secure enough to share her husband with his lover and unborn child. In the real world, if that were true, I'd be pathetic. But in Michael's world, the narcissist world, I became a saint. Sophia looked at me with something like gratitude, and I felt the first real satisfaction since the day I had found them together. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. Do you hate me?" I considered the question with genuine thoughtfulness. "I don't know you well enough to hate you," I finally said. "I hate what's happened. But you're carrying a child, and whatever else is true, that matters. I want to help you stay healthy. That's all." It was perfect. The truth twisted just enough to serve my purposes. I didn't know Sophia well. I was beginning to, though. Every word she spoke, every fear she confessed, every weakness she revealed was being catalogued in the steel trap memory that had served me so well in survival. Over the next weeks, I became Sophia's confidant. I drove her to her doctor's appointments. I sat with her through her fears about single motherhood, though I didn't correct her obvious delusion that Michael would actually leave me for her. I listened while she described his manipulation, never telling her that I'd already documented it in triplicate. I learned which people she trusted, which ones she didn't, which of Michael's associates had warned him about his spending patterns. Most importantly, I learned that she was as blindly in love with him as I'd once been, which meant she was vulnerable to the same betrayals that had shaped my understanding of the man I'd married. She was, in every way that mattered, my ally in her own destruction. On a Tuesday morning in March, while Sophia napped upstairs and Michael was at work, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. "Cassandra? This is Robertson. I worked with Michael at Hartwell Investment Group years ago. We met at a company party once." I remembered him vaguely, a quiet man with sharp eyes who'd left the company before I'd really known Michael. "I'm calling because I'm consulting with a law firm, and your name came up in a case I'm reviewing." His voice was tense. "There are documents, financial records. Michael's been involved in some things that I thought you should know." My pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" "Can we meet?" "Not over the phone." We agreed on a coffee shop 2 towns over. When Robert arrived with a flash drive and a haunted expression, I understood why he'd looked frightened on the phone. The documents told a story of systematic embezzlement. Michael hadn't just hidden money. He'd stolen it from clients, falsified reports, created phantom investments. For 8 years, he'd been running a scheme that had cost people their retirement savings. The amounts were staggering, and every trace of it led directly to him. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked carefully. "Because I found out about his affair," Robert said quietly. "And because I know about the accounts in Sophia's name, the ones where he's been parking stolen money to hide it. She doesn't know, by the way. Neither does she know that he's planning to leave you, but keep the money hidden somewhere she can't touch it. I have friends in accounting. Michael's talking about relocating to Brazil." Brazil. He was planning to vanish with Sophia and the unborn child, using embezzled money to start a new life while leaving me with the legal liability and emotional wreckage. I felt something crystallize inside me, not rage, but clarity, the kind of clarity that made everything simple. "Thank you for this," I said to Robert, and meant it. "What you've done matters." "Are you going to be okay?" he asked, and I heard genuine concern in his voice. "Better than okay," I replied. "I'm going to be free." I hired the best divorce lawyer in the state, a woman named Victoria Reeves, who looked at the evidence with cold, professional satisfaction. She was a shark disguised as a woman in a charcoal suit, and she was exactly what I needed. "This changes everything," Victoria said, spreading the documents across her mahogany desk. "The embezzlement, the hidden accounts, the attempt to conceal assets through his girlfriend, Cassandra. You're not just getting a favorable divorce settlement. You're getting his entire financial world." "What about criminal charges?" I asked. "That depends on whether you report it. Some wives in your position might want to use it as leverage for the divorce first. Get what you can legally, then decide what to report. I considered this. Victoria was suggesting I blackmail him, essentially. Threaten exposure unless he surrendered the financial settlement I wanted. It was ruthless but not illegal. What do you recommend? I asked. She smiled. I recommend you let him think everything is fine until the papers are ready. Then we hit him with everything at once. No negotiation. No leverage games. Just a hammer blow. I nodded slowly. And the mistress? She's collateral damage, Victoria said without apology. Whatever money he's hidden in her name will be frozen as part of the investigation. The baby, she paused, choosing her words carefully. That complicates things emotionally, but legally it doesn't change your position. That night, I lay in bed beside Michael while he slept, and I finally allowed myself to feel the magnitude of what was coming. The truth was, I didn't want to destroy Sophia. She was a pawn, just as I'd been a pawn in a different way. But Michael? Michael had made his choices knowing exactly what he was doing. He'd stolen from people. He'd stolen from me. And he believed himself so clever that he'd never imagined I could be the architect of his downfall. Tomorrow, I would go back to being the devoted wife. I would help Sophia. I would smile at Michael over dinner. I would be patient, invisible, inevitable. The storm was coming. The Hartwell Foundation Gala came on a Saturday in late April. Michael had insisted on attending, despite the complications in our marriage, because maintaining appearances was everything to him. I chose a dress in midnight blue, something elegant and understated that made me look like a woman in control. Victoria had advised it. You want to look like the winner before anyone knows you've won, she'd said. Sophia, of course, was heavily pregnant and couldn't attend. Michael had told her he didn't want her public, which was true, but not for the reason she thought. The real reason was that her absence would make what happened next even more devastating. The ballroom glittered with the usual suspects. Wealthy donors, ambitious employees, women in expensive jewels trying to outshine each other. Michael worked the room like he always did, charming and confident, telling stories where he was the hero. I followed a few steps behind, the devoted wife, invisible. At 9 o'clock, Michael stood to make a toast to the gala's honoree. He was magnificent in his tailored suit, arrogance radiating from him like heat. He spoke about integrity and ethical business practices, about the importance of honest investment management, and I watched people nod and applaud. That was when I made my move. During the applause, I stood and excused myself to the bathroom. On my way back, I passed Michael's table and deliberately stumbled, catching myself on the back of his chair. When I straightened, I let a document fall from my clutch to the floor near his seat, visible only to those at his immediate table. It was a bank statement from one of his hidden accounts. 8 years of deposits. $190,000. A woman beside him picked it up, glancing at it before handing it to Michael. She was the wife of the CEO, and her eyes sharpened with understanding. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Around the table, people exchanged glances. Michael's face went pale. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw actual fear in his eyes. I smiled gently and returned to my seat. Within 5 minutes, the woman had whispered to her husband. Within 10 minutes, her husband was on his phone with someone important. By the time dessert was served, the entire table knew that Michael was in serious trouble. But I wasn't done. As Michael stood to leave, I touched his arm softly. Before you go, everyone should know about your investment strategy, I said, loud enough to carry. Specifically the account you opened in Sophia Hartley's name. The one with the cash transfers that don't match your supposed business investments. I think people here should know that the man who just spoke about integrity has been stealing from them. The room went quiet, absolutely silent. Michael's face cycled through colors, white, red, purple. You're lying. You're having some kind of breakdown. I have documentation, I said calmly. 8 years of it. Robert Chin has provided affidavits. There are also emails about your plans to leave the country. The CEO stood abruptly. Security. What happened next moved very quickly. Michael was escorted from the gala. His career imploded within hours as people he'd wronged came forward. The embezzlement investigation led to criminal charges. The stolen funds had to be repaid. His professional licenses were revoked. Sophia, when she learned what he'd done, experienced her own devastating reckoning. The money he'd promised her didn't exist. The future he'd painted was a lie. She was pregnant, unmarried, and the girlfriend of a man about to face federal charges. I didn't feel triumph watching her suffer. Instead, I felt something like relief. She would be okay. She was young, capable, and better off without him. But she would learn what I had learned, that the men who are most charming are often the most dangerous. The divorce was finalized in 90 days. I received our home, which I sold immediately. I received his pension, his 401k, and half of what remained of his legitimate assets. Victoria ensured I was protected from any criminal liability related to his actions, positioning me as the whistleblower rather than an accomplice. When it was over, I had my freedom and my financial security. More importantly, I had my life back. 6 months later, I met with Sophia for coffee. She had delivered a healthy baby boy, and she looked exhausted in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and hard-won survival. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "If you hadn't exposed Michael, I would have discovered all of this when the baby was newborn. I would have been trapped." I nodded, accepting this grace she was offering me. "I know what I did was wrong," she continued. "I knew he was married. I told myself it didn't matter, that what you don't know can't hurt you. But I was lying to myself." "You're not entirely to blame," I said. "Michael was the one who made promises. You just believed them. It was generous of me, perhaps more generous than she deserved. But I'd learned something important during those months of careful observation. Mercy didn't make me weak. It made me strong. It meant I could walk away without poison in my heart." Sophia reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "I'm starting over. New city. New job. My parents are helping with the baby." "That's good," I said, and I meant it. A year after the gala, I stood in my new apartment, smaller than my old home, but mine in every way that mattered, and looked at the life I'd built in the wreckage of my marriage. I'd gone back to graduate school. I'd started a consulting firm that helped women untangle complicated financial situations, particularly in divorces. I'd learned to invest, to build wealth on my own terms, to never again depend on a man to define my worth. The lessons Michael had taught me through his betrayals had made me fierce. Patience, observation, the understanding that real power isn't loud. It's invisible until the moment it matters. My friends asked how I'd known Michael was planning to leave me for Sophia. The truth was complex, but I told them what was truest. I'd learned to listen to what men revealed about themselves when they thought no one was paying attention. My mother asked if I was angry. I told her I'd used anger as fuel, but I wasn't living in it anymore. Anger was a room I'd learned to exit. My lawyer, Victoria, asked if I had regrets. I told her the only regret I had was not leaving sooner. On quiet nights, I sometimes thought about Michael, now disgraced, now working a job far beneath his former status, now living in a small apartment because no one would hire him for anything better. I thought about Sophia, rebuilding her life with her son. I thought about the people he'd stolen from and hoped they'd been made whole. But mostly I just lived. I learned that true strength wasn't about revenge served cold. It was about surviving intact. It was about understanding that sometimes the best response to betrayal is simply walking away while they're still too stunned to follow. The quiet storm had done its work. It had cleared away the lies, the manipulation, the poisoned foundation of my marriage. And in its wake, something new had grown. Freedom, clarity, self-worth. Those were worth more than any revenge fantasy, no matter how perfectly executed. 3 years after the gala, I was invited to speak at a women's conference about financial literacy in marriage. As I stood at the podium, looking out at faces both hopeful and haunted, I shared what I'd learned. The most dangerous men aren't always the ones who yell, I said. Often they're the charming ones, the ones who make you feel small so gradually you don't notice the erosion. The ones who convince you that your instincts are wrong and their lies are truth. I paused, letting that sink in. If you're in a situation where you're questioning your reality, trust your observation. Trust what you see. Document everything. Build your own security. Don't wait for someone to validate your concerns. A woman raised her hand. Did you regret trying to destroy him? I considered the question carefully. I didn't try to destroy him. I simply exposed what was already true. He destroyed himself. I just stopped enabling it. That distinction mattered. It was the difference between vengeance and justice, between living for the past and building a future. As I left the stage, I caught my reflection in the glass and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because I looked different physically, though I'd learned to dress for myself rather than for approval, but because my eyes held something they hadn't before. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of survival, the knowledge that I had endured, adapted, and ultimately thrived. The quiet storm had made me into something resilient. And nothing, not lies, not manipulation, not betrayal, would ever diminish that again. I spent 15 years invisible, but invisibility taught me to see. I watched every lie, cataloged every betrayal, and learned that my silence was never weakness, it was preparation. When I finally spoke at that gala, it wasn't anger that moved people. It was truth wrapped in evidence, delivered with the precision of someone who refused to be erased. My story isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the narrative. Respect isn't given by those who underestimated you. It's seized by those brave enough to expose what was always hidden. Your husband, your family, your circle. They may have written you invisible, but invisibility is where the strongest women learn to see everything. Document your reality. Trust your instincts. Build your own foundation so you never need permission to leave. The credit won't come from them. Your vindication won't come from their apologies. It comes from waking up one day and knowing you survived not because you were lucky, but because you refused to dissolve. Your boundaries aren't difficult, they're revolutionary. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been gaslit into questioning their perception. Tell them, your silence doesn't make you weak. Your survival makes you extraordinary. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories about women who turn pain into power, betrayal into clarity, and humiliation into freedom. Because the revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. Your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered.